So sorry that this is a venous session that's coming to the arterial. We are kind of 1.5 hours behind schedule. I have got to reach the airport by 3 o'clock, and so I'll just quickly do this for you. Is it opening? Let's see. Yeah. So I'll just take you through this a different but a very, very rewarding procedure and a technically very easy procedure. Honestly speaking, compared to what we have been hearing so far, this is easy, but it's more to do, I think, with the frame of mind than anything else. So when we have a patient who comes to us with, oh, this is not connected, I'm sorry. So like I was saying, it's an easy procedure and very, very rewarding. So when we have a patient with DVT, the three aims that we have in our mind is, one, I have to recanalize the vessel, I have to prevent progression, and we have to treat and prevent pulmonary embolism. So the topic today is, do we recanalize, and if so, when do we recanalize? Some of the things that are not achieved by conventional therapy is actually restoration of venous patency completely and maintenance of venous valvular function, and thus prevention of recurrence, because we find that recanalization is never complete. The limitation of anticoagulation is this, that in less than 10% of patients do we actually get complete resolution. 40% will continue to form thrombi, and then once you stop anticoagulation, you find the presence of DVT or an anticoagulation is present in DVT. These patients will develop post-thrombotic syndrome. At least a large percentage of them will develop in the next few months, and then we have a leg that is much worse than what we started off with, and of course the problems associated with long-term anticoagulation. The key thing to remember, anticoagulation by itself does not alleviate hemodynamic disturbances, does not prevent subsequent valvular damage, and it does not prevent persistent venous hypertension and problems like these because of this. So one of the big aims of actually recanalizing the vein is to prevent this situation where you have a patient who comes to with a edematous leg, a pigmented leg, an ulcerated leg with absolutely no therapeutic options whatever, and very often when these people are young, remember, the years ahead, life is miserable, they cannot stand at work, they cannot walk for long, and obviously the quality of life is extremely poor. So when a patient comes with venous edema in the next few months, we have to understand that in the majority of them, after 90 days, it's all because of incompetent venous valves. So you find that the patient, when he presents to you initially, 100% of them, it's because of venous occlusion, but as the days go by, we'll have edema in 78 to 72% of the patient. Now it's not because of the DVT per se as much as incompetent valves, severe venous hypertension, and resulting in varicose veins and ulcers, which cannot be treated by any mode of therapy. Now this is a paper that was presented in 1980, and it says for over 3 decades, and this is from the National Institute of Health, it's a consensus conference on DVT. It says the primary method of therapy used by almost all physicians for the management of DVT and pulmonary embolism has been anticoagulation. This form of therapy has become so ingrained in medical practice that physicians, while still concerned over bleeding risk of anticoagulation, seem secure in the belief that they are providing optimal, if not ideal, therapy for these disorders. With the advent of thrombolytic therapy, this is no longer true for a large number of cases. And today, if we take it, for close to 50 years, this is what we've been practicing, and it's hard to find people who actually treat DVT today with thrombolytics, and they still believe what they're doing is right, with the low molecular weight industry, weight heparin industry pushing this therapy so strongly. When we talk of thrombolytic therapy, it can obviously be divided into systemic and catheter directed. Now this is again a paper which is not recent, but shows the fact that with IV thrombolysis alone, you can reduce the incidence of post-thrombotic syndrome significantly when compared to heparin alone. So you can reduce it by more than 50%, which shows that definitely here we have something which is far better than plain heparin. But the problem is you can have bleeding in about 5% of the patient, intracranial 1% of the patient. So we have a patient who comes with a swelling in the leg, and if he dies, obviously we are worried. And the problem being that we have to run thrombolysis IV for several days when we are treating it intravenously. The advantage of catheter-guided thrombolysis, it is direct and we use it within the thrombus. Most of the agent is actually utilized within the thrombus itself, and thus you find that peripheral circulation is less and we reduce the incidence of side effects. And these are of course some studies which talk about the advantages, but I'll go to something more recent as we go down the paper. So, but look at this. Now, this is a study from 1991, radiology from Mevison. He's actually one of the people who's done the largest amount of work in intraarterial and intravenous thrombolysis. And they had 30% lysis, complete lysis, but in close to 99% of the people you find, they had a more than 50% lysis, which itself produces dramatic improvement in the patient's overall outcome. Now the advantage, like I said, is we can reduce the drug, we can reduce the time, we can reduce the cost, and a much improved response rate. Now thus, when we know that this is a more useful procedure, obviously we have to think which is the group of patients who could be subjected for this form of therapy. One, in whom is suspected long-term survival. You'll have a DVT in a malignancy, in a terminal malignancy, it's not worth doing it. Then of course, all the routine contraindications of thrombolysis should be taken into account, especially head injury and trauma, which should come to the hospital and they're lying in bed and they develop DVT. Massive DVT with a leg that looks close to gangrenous is a definite indication. Then we have got patients with iliofemoral DVT. This is not indicated when the DVT is below the femoral, below the iliac, especially in the popliteal and below segment, because this group of patients do not have a bad outcome in terms of a post-thrombotic syndrome, and we do not treat them with thrombolysis. Multiple segments of DVT, you find it in the popliteal, in the femoral, in the iliac, and going up, and of course patients who are symptomatic despite anticoagulation. Let me show you a picture. Now this is how it would look. The young patient who presented the DVT in the first few days under ultrasound guidance. Very simple procedure for anyone who does vascular work. Under ultrasound guidance, you see this thick, turgid popliteal vein, puncture the popliteal vein, and when you inject contrast, you will actually see the large filling defects, which I will show you. Put a 4 French or a 5 French sheath and take a long perfusion catheter, take it all the way up, right up to the iliac vein, and then start thrombolysing and pulling back the catheter every 4 to 6 hours, and you will slowly and effectively recanalize the vein in large population. So this is how it would look when you inject. You can see no flow into the veins at all, just filling defects, nothing going all the way up there. And now this is the end of 24 hours. You can see this filling defect caused by the functional valves. The vein is open all the way up. Another distinct advantage is often you can find out the underlying cause of DVT, which you can never find with venous or intravenous forms of therapy, where you find this patient's got a long segment stenosis or a stricture. You can dilate it, place a stent. Now in this case, since the confluence was not involved, it is okay. But if you find that the stent is going to protrude into the IVC, your stent must have a diameter that will match the IVC diameter. So it should be around 18 or 20, and you must go right at least 1 centimeter into the IVC, because it has been shown if you do not do that, the segment where the jet hits on the IVC becomes stenotic. And of course the results was good like expected, because you are giving him what's close to a normal vessel. Here's another case to show you what is the end result with thrombolysis. He's got a fenestrated superficial femoral vein. And we know that this patient should ideally be on lifelong anticoagulants because these underlying anatomy itself will induce a further DVT later on in future. So one of the advantages, not only are we clearing the vein, we can see the underlying anatomy, you can plan your therapy better, you can dilate and stent if it is necessary. And a combination of acute or chronic was seen in 19. This is a reasonably recent paper, and it tells you that these are the predictors of success. If you have a patient with an acute iliofemoral less than 10 days, the chances that you're going to recanalize is very, very high. It's really high. If you don't have a past history of DVT, obviously you're not treating acute or chronic, the results are going to be better. If you want to do, it is better with a popliteal approach where you can move your catheter up and down, even break the clot to some extent and lyse it with better results. Complete results, lysis was seen in close to 65% in the registry group, which is including all, both chronic, subacute and acute. So if you think that in acute they could get practically all of them, 1 year patency is excellent, it's 96%, and thus we are talking about an excellent procedure, an evidence-based form of treatment for DVT. And this is the consensus statement from the Society of Interventional Radiology, 2006. It says that the Society of Interventional Radiology, SIR, considers the use of catheter-directed intrathrombus thrombolysis as an adjunct to anticoagulant therapy to represent an acceptable initial treatment strategy for carefully selected patients with acute iliofemoral deep vein thrombosis. In other words, it's a procedure that is today considered scientific, acceptable, and not something anecdotal or not something in research. The reasons are standalone anticoagulant therapy fails to prevent post-thrombotic syndrome in a significant proportion of patients with acute proximal DVT, leading to significant disability, quality of life impairment, and socioeconomic loss. Patients with iliofemoral DVT are particularly in high risk of post-thrombotic syndrome and disability. Treatment strategies that features early thrombus removal may prevent post-thrombotic syndrome. Catheter-directed thrombolysis has significant potential to prevent post-thrombotic syndrome and offers distinct advantages compared with surgical venous thrombectomy, systemic thrombolysis, and anticoagulation alone. Adjunctive catheter-directed thrombolysis is likely to provide faster symptom relief than anticoagulation alone and does not increase the risk of symptomatic pulmonary embolism. The other device that in the market, the angiojet system, it's popular in the West, especially in the peripheries, not so good in the pulmonary arteries, adds to the cost, but it can make your procedure much faster. It basically uses saline at a high velocity, but the Bernoulli's principle, there's a vacuum created which allows the collected lysed thrombus or broken thrombus to be sucked out. And these are of course not our work, but from the literature where you can get very, very similar kind of things, but at the end you would still add thrombolysis after the procedure is over. The trellis device is something that is more promising, less invasive, very popular in the US, and will soon be available in India, which again uses a catheter which has got a sinusoidal wire inside, so use of mechanical and a regional thrombolysis combination to get better results. A word about pulmonary embolism. I know that many of you must already be doing it, but just a word to tell that this is the doses that is internationally accepted. You give an infusion of 2.5 lakhs mixed with 2 lakhs units of heparin over 2 hours, followed by infusion of 1 lakh units for 12 to 24 hours. You can use RTP at a bolus of 10 milligram, or you can continue it either as followed by an infusion into the artery for the next 7 to 10 hours in a dose of 20 milligrams, which is given over 2 hours, and then the balance over the next few hours. In our center, we use urokinase more often, and this can also be done on body kg weight. Heparin infusion, you can give it at 1000 units per hour to start with and monitor it on PTT levels and do it. There are many, many devices that are available to fragment the thrombus in the pulmonary artery, but even today one of the best things is actually just to use a pigtail catheter. Strangely, it produces very good results. And this is of course a technique where you can make a large hole with a little and allow the wire to be pushed through it and take the whole system, but even this is not necessary. Use a larger pigtail like a 6 or a 7 French pigtail which is braided And as you torque it with the wire just behind it so that the loop is formed, you can fragment it with very, very good results. Now, the other devices, like I said, are available in the market, but I do not know of any of them which have been actually FDA approved, dedicated for pulmonary artery use. So, these are, of course, multiple series that are from different centers, which they talk about, using a device. This is catheter-guided thrombolysis with the EndoWave system, and the EndoWave is a system which again not available in India, but I believe this holds promise, and so I couldn't really talk about what the final results are like, but I believe this combination of using ultrasound-like waves as well as thrombolysis uses a combination of mechanical as well as regional thrombolytic. And this is from the journal, as you can see. So finally, in conclusion, we have to understand that catheter-guided thrombolysis is the treatment of choice in iliofemoral DVT and in pulmonary embolism and the other indications which I talked about. We must also know that mechanical devices do hold promise. It's so important for us to understand that our practice has to change with scientific data that's available. You're going to see hundreds of papers, but what's important to know that how reliable are these. And like I said, this is a safe procedure, it's an easy procedure, technically not very demanding, with very, very good results. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cherian. Just a simple question, many times when we are handling the pulmonary embolism, before you put the pigtail, we go in with a big sort of end-hole catheter and actually aspirate, and you can get a lot of thrombus out. So you're trying to actually reduce the thrombus burden before you start chemical thrombolysis.
That's perfect, actually. So
the other thing which we follow is we actually break the thrombus, as you're introducing a pigtail in the pulmonary circulation. You actually perforate the thrombus in various areas, fragment it so that you can get your urokinase fairly down distally into the pulmonary thrombus.
One is to aspirate, like you said, debulking is the way those angiotensin devices and all of them work. So if you can mechanically do it, I think it's very good.
What do you think of this surgical thrombectomy? I mean, not many people do it, but some reports from Bangalore which are consistently...
Yeah, actually, Narayana Hrudayalaya, they do a lot of it. See, the thing is, I think it's got a lot of role when it's subacute, and it's gone beyond the 10 days or 12 days where you want. But I think the first approach should be an endovascular.
I guess it could be reserved for people who are presenting late.
Yeah, they present late.
Yeah, I mean, say a history of DVT 6 months back. Today somebody comes with pulmonary hypertension persistent. All that you do is anticoagulate them.
Exactly.
I think that subset could be addressed surgically, and I think the results are looking extremely good.
So Dr. Cherian, in your opinion, every patient with, this is Dr. Tyagi from GV Pant Hospital, every patient with proximal iliofemoral thrombosis today should undergo thrombolysis unless contraindicated?
Yes, absolutely.
Because, that should be the message, I think.
Yeah, that's the message. The reason is that they all look fine, but 6 months later you have a very bad leg which you can't treat. And I think we should take all precautions to prevent that.
Matthew, the dose is the same as the pulmonary embolism.
Yeah, the dose is the same. We infuse 1 lakh unit per hour. See, the only problem we had is actually when you have both sides, when we really don't have a dose, so we may have to push it up a little more. But remember, if your catheter is within the thrombus, the whole of the the lytic agent is consumed by the thrombus. There's nothing in the periphery. So it's only when you start coming out of the thrombus that we are more worried about how much of peripheral circulation is there. I think, we can be a little more aggressive if you feel, provided you're sure you're inside the thrombus.
We give heparin intravenous along with...
Beg your pardon? I couldn't...
We are giving heparin intravenous as an infusion drip, along with urokinase, which is getting in the pulmonary circulation. Right thing to do, or...?
It has to be done, because they have found that there is proximal thrombosis takes place because of the catheter. Because like I said, a lot of it is not circulated in the periphery.
Do we need to give heparin along with urokinase?
Yes, you must give not through the catheter.
Through the catheter.
Yeah, in the artery, for example, we do it through the sheath, or you can give it intravenously. See, titrate with the PTT.
Would you
or an ACT, yes.
Would you recommend thrombolysis for DVT low down in the veins
also?
No,
below the popliteals you don't do it. Even with
if
femoral we don't do it.
Is very large?
Beg your pardon?
Even if the thrombus burden is very large and the
Well,
entire
that's
veins.
below the femoral, below the popliteal can't be large, isn't it? Because they are such small vessels, and we have found that by elevating, scientifically there is no data to allow it. What I mean is there's no
What is the
evidence
risk
to
of
say it.
pulmonary embolism in these patients?
Yeah, we
Thrombolysis
don't
for
see
DVT.
pulmonary embolism provided it's limited to the iliac veins. We may be seeing small ones, but they already lies fragmented, so hardly anything happens. But if it goes into the IVC, it's good to put a temporary filter.
Filter before.
Yes. No. Because then you lose out the whole of the femoral line. The bulk of the vein that has valves is lost. The valves are all in the femoral vein. So we have to go popliteal puncture. Believe me, it's very easy to do it. Beg your pardon? I don't know because I have not used it. I can only talk about what's available in literature and what we use.
No, I don't
maybe
think
you can,
we
yeah.
can suggest the use for iliac or femoral DVT, but we can definitely use in pulmonary circulation. In fact, the data is very strong in pulmonary circulation.
No, you can't. It's not possible. Honestly, it's because you think it is difficult. Try it once. It is not difficult. Because you have a thrombosed vein, it can't bleed. It actually is more posterior than the popliteal artery. What you need is a linear probe in the ultrasound room, that's all.
How many of them, once you give local thrombolysis, would need IVC filter? Is there
That's why I said, if you see a thrombus extending into the IVC, that's the only group you would need a filter. Ideally it should be a temporary filter, but it adds to the cost, it doubles the cost, that's the only problem.
Leave aside the cost, but if it is limited to only one iliac, there is no indication
No
for
indication
filter.
at all. Literature doesn't show us
But-
any indication.
But IVC thrombus, without any evidence of filter, still you feel is an indication for filter or?
No, IVC there is indication that, because what happens, a large chunk may actually migrate up. In the femoral, there are small bits that go which still may not be so bad.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Like if the patient has large iliofemoral DVT and pulmonary embolism, you're likely to thrombolyze the patient systemically.
Yeah.
So in that setting, if the patient still has residual large iliofemoral DVT, because one of the indications for systemic thrombolysis is that it is also likely to dissolve some of the
True.
DVT.
See, you will do IV in those cases because it's a combination, and then later, after your P part is solved, you can still attempt, but I think most of the time this should be enough.
And another, suppose there is a large right heart clot,
Yeah.
and you're not seeing which may or may not be accompanied with a DVT. In those cases, do you actually take the catheter up to the right atrium and inject, or would you?
Well, actually, I'm not a cardiologist, and I